Have you ever pictured this? A family gathering that seemed so ordinary, inside a cozy wooden cabin by a quiet Vermont lake, suddenly turned into a deadly game of survival. Emily Carter, a 29-year-old nurse who had left her small town to find freedom, sat at the table. Across from her was her brother, Mark, his eyes burning with greed. Beside him, her sister-in-law Jessica smiled sweetly. But there was nothing warm in it, only cold calculation. And then, without warning, Mark slammed a gun onto the table. His voice was low and rough, like a storm rolling in. Sign the papers. The house, the land, everything goes to us. If you don't, you'll regret it. The air froze. Emily's mother stood in the kitchen, pretending to busy herself with dishes. Her father folded his arms, eyes darting away, refusing to meet hers. No one stepped in. No one defended her. Their silence was sharper than the barrel aimed at Emily's chest. But Emily didn't flinch. She didn't crumble. Instead, she gave the faintest smile, set the pen down on the table, and lifted her head, her voice calm, yet edged with steel. If you really think you've won, then look up. In the corner of the room, a tiny red light blinked. A hidden camera. Jessica's face drained of color. Mark swallowed hard, his hands beginning to shake. And in that moment we, the audience, understood this wasn't just a family get-together anymore. It was a dark stage, and the truth was about to be exposed. So what twisted a family reunion into a standoff with a gun? Why would a brother turn a weapon on his own sister, just to force her out of her inheritance? And how did Emily, the forgotten child, the one dismissed all her life, manage to turn the game around, even with her life on the line? This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about greed, betrayal, and a brutal lesson sometimes. Silence within a family can be deadlier than the bullet itself. Emily Carter would never forget the feeling when she stepped out of the rental car and saw the wooden cabin by the lake in Vermont. From the outside, everything radiated an almost unreal warmth. A thin stream of smoke drifted from the chimney, the faint scent of apple pie floated on the breeze, and the golden glow from the windows spilled into the fading afternoon light. To anyone else, it could have looked like the perfect weekend getaway for an American family. A small cabin, crisp fresh air, glasses of wine waiting on the table, and smiles greeting you at the front porch. Emily walked inside, forcing herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. The living room was so cozy it nearly convinced her it was all genuine. Amber-stained wooden walls, a fire roaring in the stone fireplace, and a dining table already set. A red and white-checkered tablecloth, crystal glasses catching the light. In the corner, her mother fussed over a pie, pretending to be busy.
"Emily, you're here!"
"Come in, sit down, sweetheart. I baked your favorite apple pie." Her voice was overly bright, almost too cheerful, as if covering up something she didn't want revealed. Then came Jessica, her sister-in-law, emerging from the kitchen. Her smile was dazzling, flawless, too polished. She wrapped her arms around Emily, but the hug was so light it barely touched her, carrying no real warmth at all. The scent of expensive perfume filled the air, drowning out even the smell of pine wood.
"Oh, Emily, I'm so glad you finally came."
Jessica's voice stretched out, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. But when Emily caught her gaze for a split second, all she saw was the shine of glassy pretense. Mark, her brother, was already seated in the armchair near the fireplace. He didn't stand. He only gave a slight nod, his eyes cold like the surface of a winter lake. No smile, no hug, just a silent stare. A reminder that this wasn't going to be a carefree family reunion. The entire cabin looked like a cozy postcard, perfect on the surface. But beneath that glossy picture, Emily felt something different. Not closeness, not comfort, only orchestration. Everything was too neat, too polished, almost staged, as if the room wasn't prepared to welcome her, but to conceal something else entirely. They sat at the table. Jessica poured wine with practiced grace, talking endlessly about the weather, about the bright red maple leaves lining the road to the lake. Emily's mother scurried back and forth, piling on more food. Pie, salad, cold cuts, so hurried, it seemed like she was afraid someone might notice the silence if she stopped. Her father sat rigidly at the head of the table, his face expressionless, eyes locked on the swirl of red wine in his glass, avoiding every bit of conversation. Emily sipped her drink, trying to match the rhythm of the room. But inside her, alarms rang loud and constant. She couldn't name the feeling, but she knew it: a house too tidy, conversations too forced, smiles too sharp. All of it was hiding something on the verge of breaking. And in that moment, Emily realized she had just stepped into a game of chess. And no matter how warm the cabin seemed, beneath the amber, stained wood, every beam was trembling, waiting for a storm no one dared to name. Emily sank into the chair by the window, where the last trace of sunset slipped through the curtains. She let her gaze wander around the table, over faces that had once filled her childhood, and yet now looked like strangers. Mark Carter, her brother, still carried the solid frame he always had: broad shoulders, a straight back, the heavy hands of a man used to physical work. But his eyes, they were different. When they were kids, Mark would carry her on his back, racing across snowy fields, their laughter echoing through the air. Now those same eyes were hard as steel, weighted with resentment and ambition. He was no longer the brother who once protected her, but a stranger calculating every move. Mark barely spoke, only tapping his fingers on the table now and then, as if measuring out his patience. Beside him sat Jessica, her sister-in-law, pouring more wine. She wore a deep burgundy dress, perfume so rich it coated the room. Every gesture was graceful, every smile perfectly rounded. But Emily had learned long ago. Jessica's smiles never reached her eyes. She lived to perform, to control the room with sugar-coated lines edged in sarcasm. From the moment she married into the family, Jessica had never treated Emily like a sister. To her, Emily was just an outsider, a name of little worth, a nobody who'd stumbled into an inheritance she didn't deserve. Her mother was different. She rushed constantly between the kitchen and the table, hands always busy with pies, salads, and dishes. It was as if she stopped moving for even a second, the truth would spill out into the open. "Eat something." "Sweetheart, you're too thin," she said, sliding another slice of pie onto Emily's plate. Behind that motherly concern, Emily sensed fear, like her mother was trying to cover something she dared not face. She couldn't sit still, couldn't look directly into the eyes of Mark or Jessica. And her father, he sat at the head of the table, the same throne-like chair he always claimed. He had never been a man of many words. He didn't often yell, but his silence carried the kind of weight that made the air heavy. Emily remembered as a child. One glare, arms crossed, and she'd crumble inside. Now it was the same. He didn't shout, didn't scold. He simply sat there, arms folded, eyes cold, as if waiting for someone to trap themselves. Emily drew a slow breath. Every person in the room was playing a role. Mark, the responsible older brother, but in truth, greedy. Jessica, the charming sister-in-law, hiding a dagger behind her smile. Her parents, the keepers of balance, but really choosing the safest side, even if it meant abandoning their daughter. And Emily, she was the only one without a mask left to wear. She sat tall, quietly watching, childhood memories flooding back, reminding her that she had never truly belonged at this table. As a girl, she was the shadow between Mark and Jessica. The forgotten one, always compared, always invisible. That's why she had left, building her life with her own two hands. But tonight, as she looked at their faces, one truth rang clear: they hadn't invited her back to reconcile. They had brought her back to trap her. Every word, every glance, every gesture was just glossy paint covering walls that were already rotting beneath. She tightened her grip on the wineglass, reminding herself this time Emily was no longer the forgotten child. Dinner dragged on in uneasy silence. The faint clink of silverware on plates, the soft chime of glasses touching. Yet no conversation lasted long enough to fill the empty space. Emily chewed slowly. Every sound in the room stretched tight. Even the crackle of the fire in the hearth felt like a heartbeat skipping out of rhythm. Jessica was the only one still trying to keep the air from collapsing. She filled the space with chatter about the bitter cold, the traffic on the way to the cabin, the new store that had just opened downtown. Her voice was smooth, practiced, but to Emily it sounded patched together, like scraps of fabric sewn hastily to cover a tear that was already too wide. Her mother slid another plate of pie onto the table, voice rushed. "Eat, honey, eat some more. You must be exhausted from the hospital. You've lost so much weight. Emily smiled faintly and nodded, but inside she knew her mother was trying to distract, to keep the dinner from plunging into total silence. Her father hadn't said a word. He sat there staring into his glass of red wine, as if the swirling liquid held all the answers. And then, it came. Jessica set her glass down, her smile still fixed but her tone shifting, calm, almost casual. Emily, are you planning to do anything fun with the inheritance? The word landed like a stone in a still pond. Emily heard the silence crack. Her mother bowed her head, fussing with the tablecloth that didn't have a wrinkle on it. Her father coughed once, set his glass down, but kept his eyes lowered. And Mark, his eyes locked on her, cold, waiting. Emily laid her fork aside, feeling the whole room hold its breath. She gave a faint, dismissive smile. Haven't thought about it. Jessica's brow arched, her smile still shining, but the corners twitching. At least you have options. More than the rest of us. You're lucky. Mark tapped his fingers on the table. Once, twice. Then their father finally spoke, his voice deep and slow. Family should share. It's the right thing. Emily sipped her wine. We'll see, she said evenly. But inside, she knew. The game had begun. Her mother jumped in quickly, voice higher than usual. Emily, are you still in that same apartment? How's work going? She rushed the words, as if small talk could erase what had just been said. But it couldn't. Inheritance now sat at the table, larger than the plates of food, heavier than the silence. Every glance, every movement revolved around it, though no one dared say the word again. Emily looked at each of them. Her mother avoided her eyes. Her father sat frozen, stiff as a statue. Mark squinted, lips pressed thin. And Jessica sat twirling her wine glass, her smile sharpened like a blade. And in that moment, Emily understood. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a silent trial, and she was the one being judged. For a fortune she had never asked for, and the verdict seemed already written. Dinner ended in a strange hush. The clatter of silverware was gone, only a few drops of wine left in the glasses. Yet no one moved to leave the table. Emily sat still, feeling like she was caught in the center of a spider's web. Every glance, whether avoiding her or staring straight at her, seemed to circle back to her. Then Mark slammed his glass down. The sound echoed through the small cabin, sharp enough to make Emily flinch. He looked at her, his eyes dark. Emily, he said, his voice low but each word cutting clear. There's something you need to see. Jessica stood at once, her smile fixed in place as though she were guiding a guest on a tour. Come on, she said sweetly, though the hand she placed on Emily's shoulder pressed a little too hard to be comforting. Their father gave a slight nod, while their mother busied herself with the dishes, pretending she hadn't heard. They led Emily down the hallway. Each step thudded heavy against the wooden floor. The cabin, once cozy, now felt claustrophobic, every footstep pulling her deeper into a place with no way out. At the end of the hall, a door opened. Inside was a room stripped bare. No pictures on the walls, no curtains, nothing but a worn wooden table and two chairs facing each other. A single bulb hung overhead, casting a harsh yellow circle in the dim room. On the table sat a neat stack of papers, thick and crisp, with a pen laid carefully across the top. Jessica pulled a chair out gracefully. Sit down, Emily, she said, her tone sickly sweet. Mark leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes locked on his sister. Their father stood at the door like a guard, silent and unmoving. Emily lowered herself into the chair, her hands resting on her lap to hide the tremor. She looked down at the papers, page after page filled with small, sterile legal print. She flipped through one, then another. It only took seconds to understand. A waiver. A renunciation of rights, not a share, not even a split. All of it, the property, the land, the money, transferred to Mark and Jessica. Emily let out a dry, hollow laugh. Really? You actually think I'm going to sign this? Jessica didn't lose her smile. Emily, this will be so much easier if you agree. It's what your father wants. The whole family thinks so. Emily raised her eyes to her father. He said nothing, gave no nod, no shake of the head, just silence, and that silence weighed heavier than any words. Don't make this hard, Mark cut in, his voice rough, rising with impatience. Sign it. We end this here. Emily shoved the pen back across the table, her eyes flashing with defiance. End it. This is only the beginning. The air thickened, pressing down on the four of them in that cramped space. A table, a stack of papers, and 4 people, all laid out like pieces on a chessboard already set. Emily knew the moment her pen touched the page, the game would be over. But if she didn't, the game would move into something far more dangerous. And from the fire blazing in Mark's eyes, she realized they were ready for that next move. Emily stayed still, both hands resting on the table, her eyes fixed on the stack of papers. The silence in the small room was so heavy she could hear the wall clock ticking, each second dragging like a weight. Jessica forced a smile, twirling the pen between her fingers before sliding it toward Emily again. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Emily," she said, her voice smooth as honey, but beneath it was steel. Emily leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, her voice deliberately calm. "If you think I'll ever sign, then you've never truly understood me." The answer snapped Mark's patience. He suddenly yanked the chair back from the table, its legs screeching across the floor with a shrill scrape. Emily looked up, but before she could react, Mark had pulled open the drawer. Quick, decisive. The sound of metal striking wood rang out, sharp and final. Emily froze. Mark drew out a pistol, the harsh yellow light catching on its cold black surface. The air seemed to drain from the room. From the kitchen, her mother's trembling voice floated in. "Would anyone like more tea?" But no one answered. Her father remained by the door, arms crossed, face unreadable, as if he'd accepted this moment long before. Mark raised the gun, pointing it squarely at his sister. His eyes burned, all restraint gone. "Sign it," he growled, low and ragged, each word slicing like a knife. Emily swallowed hard, but her gaze didn't falter. She looked down the barrel, then back at him. "Do you really want to turn yourself into a criminal? Over a piece of paper?" Jessica stepped in, voice sweet but urgent. "Emily, stop pushing him. This isn't a game anymore. If you don't sign, you'll lose more than money." Mark's hand trembled, but the barrel stayed fixed on her. The room was deathly quiet, except for the pounding of Emily's heartbeat, fierce and relentless, as if trying to break free of her chest. A memory flashed through her mind, Mark once holding her hand across an icy stream, once chasing away neighborhood bullies. But that brother was gone. In his place stood a man consumed by greed, willing to do anything. Emily drew in a deep breath. Her hand reached toward the papers. Mark stiffened, waiting. But instead of picking up the pen, she shoved the entire stack back across the table, her voice flat, cutting cold. "You can point a gun at me all you want. You'll never have my signature." The room exploded with tension. Jessica's face blanched. She stepped forward, but Mark barked. "Don't play with me. Emily, this is your last chance." Emily arched a brow, her eyes blazing with defiance. "The last chance isn't mine. It's yours." The words sliced through the silence like a blade. The gun in Mark's hand shook harder. Her father stood motionless, but in his eyes flickered something. A flash of fear, maybe even regret. Emily knew this was the edge. One wrong move, and the room would descend into hell. But she wasn't cowering, she was facing it head on. The only one left with enough clarity to stand her ground. The gun was still aimed squarely at Emily's chest. No one in the room dared to breathe. Jessica stood just behind Mark, eyes locked on her sister, in law like a hunter waiting for its prey to tremble. Their father leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, his face as still as stone. But Emily knew his silence was complicity. Mark's voice ground out, low and harsh. "Say it again. Do you sign or not?" Emily stared straight at him, unflinching. She saw his hand tremble. Not from doubt, but from anger wound tight for too long. She inhaled, then let the word drop slow and deliberate. "Numb boy." The room detonated in silence. Jessica's mouth fell open, Mark's finger clenched the trigger, their father shifted forward as if bracing. And Emily smiled. A small, steady smile that didn't belong in a moment like this. "Are you sure you want to go all the way?" she asked, her tone as soft as a breath. "Don't push me," Mark snarled. Emily tilted her head, her eyes flashing sharp. "Then maybe you should look at the corner of the room." Instinctively, Mark glanced where she pointed. Jessica followed. There, at the seam where two walls met, a tiny red light blinked. Jessica gasped. "Oh my God, is that a camera?" Emily nodded, lips curling into a half smile. "Say hello. It's all being recorded." The room collapsed into a new kind of silence, chaotic, crushing. Mark stumbled back a step, his eyes wide. The gun in his hand shook violently now, as if it had become too heavy to hold. Jessica edged forward, her voice cracking. No, that's not possible. You wouldn't dare." Emily tapped her fingers on the table in a slow rhythm, deliberate. "Oh, I dared. And more than that. They're watching from outside." For the first time, her father spoke, his voice gravelly. What have you done?" Emily turned to him, her eyes burning. "I learned something from this family: never sit at the table unless you bring your own cards." Jessica lunged toward the corner, as if she could tear the camera off the wall, but the red light blinked back, merciless.
"Turn it off! Right now!"
she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. Emily's tone stayed calm. "Can't. It's working just fine." Mark swung back toward his sister, then to the blinking light, his face twisting from fury to panic. He growled, raising the gun, aiming straight at the lens. "Fine," he shouted. "If someone's watching, then they'll see this too." His finger pulled the trigger. The blast tore through the cabin. The walls shook. Emily's mother screamed from the kitchen. But when the smoke cleared, the camera still stood. The red light blinked on, steady, unblinking, like a cold eye that never closed. Mark staggered, disbelief etched on his face. How is it still standing?" Emily leaned back in her chair, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "Because, Mark, not everything is as easy to destroy as you think." Jessica slapped a hand over her mouth, terror flooding her features. Their father gripped the doorframe, and for the first time, Emily saw something in his eyes: fear, maybe even regret. In that room, the balance of power had shifted. The one with a gun to her chest now held all the control. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt it. They had no choice but to truly see her. The gun had already fired. Smoke still lingered in the room, the acrid smell hanging in the air. But the camera kept blinking red, cold and unyielding, defying Mark's fury. Emily sat upright, her gaze steady. "You can fire as many times as you want," she said evenly, her tone like flowing water. "The truth is still there, and not just on one camera." Jessica's face drained. The polished smile she always wore vanished, replaced by raw panic. But only for a moment. Then her expression shifted, panic hardening into calculation. She slipped a phone from her dress pocket. Her hand shook, but her fingers dialed fast, like muscle memory. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Jessica didn't answer her. She pressed the phone to her ear, her tone urgent yet commanding. "Hello. Come now. The cabin by the lake. Things are about to spin out of control." Emily narrowed her eyes. A curtain had just been pulled back. This wasn't a family plot anymore. There was someone else. Another force, pulling the strings. Mark lowered the gun, turning toward his wife. "Who did you call?" Jessica snapped her head toward him, eyes sharp as blades. "The only one who can help us keep this. If your sister thinks she's clever, let's see who's really running this game." The room thickened, air tightening until it was hard to breathe. Emily slowly stood, backing toward the wall to put space between them. Her voice was quiet, but each word cut clean. "So, this wasn't just the two of you." Jessica's smile returned, cold and razor thin. "What do you think? You and your brother aren't capable of orchestrating all this. There's someone else, Emily. Someone who's had their eye on the land, the money, all of it. And if you don't play along, you'll lose it all." Emily felt her pulse slam against her ribs. At last, the real truth revealed itself. This wasn't just about greedy siblings. It was a bigger trap, with someone outside pulling the wires. For the first time, her father spoke, his voice hoarse, strangled. "We've gone too far." But Jessica cut him off. "No, this is only the beginning. He's coming, and when he arrives, Emily will understand. She has no choice." Emily clenched her fists tight. In that instant she knew. They weren't just trying to bully her into signing papers. They were ready to use someone else's power to break her. Outside, the wind whipped through the trees, dry leaves rattling like a warning. The cabin was no longer a haven. It had become a stage, where every dark secret was about to be unveiled. Emily lifted her chin, her eyes sharp as a blade. Then let me see if the man you're counting on is truly as powerful as you believe. Jessica said nothing. She ended the call with a tap, but her smile returned. Not fake this time, but laced with menace. And in Mark's eyes, Emily saw tension tangled with doubt. Perhaps even he didn't realize he'd stepped into a game far larger than himself. The air in the cramped cabin room felt frozen. Jessica slipped her phone back into her purse, her face stretching into a cold, victorious smile. Mark still gripped the gun, but his hands were trembling now, the certainty he once had starting to fracture. Their father blocked the doorway, head bowed, as though he had just signed his family's death warrant. Emily drew in a long, steady breath. Until now she had played the weaker role. The one cornered, the one with a gun to her chest, the one trapped. But the moment Jessica made that phone call, Emily knew. It was time to flip the board. She rose slowly, pressing both hands flat against the table, her voice low but clear. You really think I came here unprepared? Jessica frowned. What do you mean? Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept the room, the blinking camera light, the inheritance papers on the table, the gun shaking in Mark's grip. All of it suddenly looked small compared to what she was about to reveal. I knew about this plan before I ever walked in, she said, not because I'm smarter than you, but because someone in this family still has a conscience. Mark froze. Ooh, Emily's lips curved. The youngest, he called me. He overheard everything. And thanks to him, I knew exactly what you were planning. Jessica went pale, blurting out. He doesn't know anything. He's mistaken. Emily lifted her hand, cutting her off. Don't bother denying it. And I didn't come here alone. The moment I stepped into this cabin, I knew how this would go. And I didn't come empty-handed. For a beat, the red light on the camera seemed to flash brighter, underscoring her words. Emily tapped her fingers lightly on the table, then said, slow and deliberate. There are at least 3 more cameras in this house. 1 in the living room, 1 in the kitchen, 1 on the porch outside. Every frame is streaming live to my attorney's office. Jessica shot to her feet, but Emily stayed calm. Sit down, she ordered, her tone sharp, commanding. And shockingly, Jessica sat back down, her eyes rattled. Mark stammered. You're lying. Emily tilted her head, smiling faintly. Then pull the trigger again. Let the whole town hear it. The silence cracked wide open. The wind hissed against the windows. The cabin's wooden beams groaned, every sound echoing like punctuation to her words. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to tremble. The truth alone was enough to shake them. You thought you were trapping me? Emily said firmly. But I've been watching your every move. And if this called outsider dares to step into this cabin. She paused, her eyes gleaming. They'll be caught on record, just like you. Jessica's mouth opened but no words came. Mark lowered the gun, sweat dripping down his temples. Even their father, silent as stone until now, couldn't hide the tremor in his hands. Emily eased back into her chair, spine straight, her eyes cutting across them one by one. This game is already over, for you. And if you keep pushing, don't expect me to show any mercy just because we share blood. In that moment, for the first time, the power in the room shifted entirely to Emily. No longer the cornered victim, she had turned their trap into a net binding the predators themselves. The wind outside the cabin howled louder, rattling the windows against their frames. No one in the room dared to breathe. Mark sat slumped, the gun loose in his hand, sweat streaking down his face. Jessica tried to hold herself together, but her eyes kept darting toward the door, as if waiting for the rescuer she had called. Their father stood blocking the doorway, his aging face stiff, his arms folded across his chest, but his hands trembled. Emily sat tall, her gaze sharp as a blade. I told you, she whispered. This game doesn't belong to you anymore. Then came the knock. 3 firm, deliberate raps, like a hammer striking down on a chessboard mid-match. Jessica exhaled in relief and rushed to the door. They're here, she whispered, her voice tinged with both triumph and desperation. But when the door swung open, her smile froze. It wasn't her so-called allies. It was two towering officers in uniform, and behind them, a man in a dark suit, Emily's attorney.
Nobody move.
One officer commanded, his voice deep and absolute. Mark jerked up by reflex, raising the gun, but it barely lifted before one officer lunged, twisting it from his grip with practiced precision. The weapon clattered to the floor, the sound chilling. Jessica stumbled back, her eyes wide. No, that's impossible. How did you? Emily remained seated, calm. I called them long before you started your performance, Jessica. While you were busy acting, I was preparing the ending. The lawyer stepped forward, a file in his hand. He laid it on the table where the fraudulent papers still lay scattered. I've reviewed these, he said. Not only are they worthless, they constitute attempted coercion of inheritance. A Mark, now handcuffed, thrashed wildly. No.
This is my house.
It should have been mine. But his screams were drowned out by the officer reading him his Miranda rights. Jessica staggered, nearly collapsing into a chair. I didn't mean, I was just trying to help him. Her voice shook, but no one believed those flimsy words anymore. Their father stood frozen, then slowly lowered his arms. He wasn't cuffed, but the lawyer's gaze was enough to make him bow his head, weighed down by a shame heavier than any sentence. Emily rose, circling the table until she stood directly in front of Mark. She looked straight into his eyes, seething with rage and despair. You always thought I was weak, she said quietly, so only he could hear. But you forgot something. Even the weak can learn how to fight back. And this time, I did more than that. Silence pressed in for a beat. Then the officers led Mark out, his figure disappearing beyond the cabin door. Jessica remained pale as paper, held back for questioning. Their father turned away, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. The room was left with nothing but the amber glow of the lamp, the worthless stack of papers, and the camera's red light, still blinking, still recording every truth. Emily drew in a deep breath. For the first time in years, her lungs filled with air that felt truly free. The days after that night in the cabin passed like a storm. Word spread quickly through the small town. A family once thought quiet and ordinary had become the subject of whispers. A brother pulling a gun on his sister to steal her inheritance, a sister-in-law tied to shady land deals, a father complicit through silence. For Emily, it all happened so fast that sometimes she wondered, had she really lived through it, or was it just some nightmare staged by someone else? The trial came 3 months later, held in the county courthouse. The old wooden chamber was packed, every bench filled. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked. Emily sat in the front row, clutching the silver bracelet she always wore, the only gift left from her grandfather. Mark was brought in first. He wore the orange of the county jail, wrist still marked from shackles. As the prosecutor read the charges, Emily lifted her eyes to him. His once cold face now looked worn, drained, but his stare still carried pure hatred. Finally, the judge's voice rang out, firm and final. 7 years in prison for armed threats and attempted extortion. Gasps rippled through the room. Mark bowed his head, his shoulders sagging, but the last look he cast toward Emily was still a blade of ice. Jessica came in next. She wore a plain black dress, hair disheveled, stripped of her once polished elegance. When the prosecutor revealed her ties to a shadowy group of real estate investors, Jessica broke down, crying, swearing she had only followed her husband's lead, that none of it was truly her idea. But the text messages, the recordings, told another story. The sentence came swiftly: 5 years of house arrest and 3 years of mandatory supervision. Jessica crumpled, tears spilling, but no one in the room felt pity anymore. Emily's father was the last to face judgment. He hadn't wielded the gun, hadn't signed the papers, but his silence, his refusal to act while his daughter stared down a weapon, was its own weight. The court handed him 2 years probation and hundreds of hours of community service. As the verdict was read, he lowered his head, his eyes wet, whether from shame or tears, no one could tell. Emily sat quietly, watching each of them leave the stand. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. There was no triumph in her chest, only a vast emptiness spreading inside. Justice had been served. But in return, her family, broken and flawed though it was gone, shattered beyond repair. When the judge's gavel struck, ending the session, Emily rose and walked out of the courthouse. The spring air was clear, sunlight spilling across the stone steps. Reporters crowded forward, microphones thrust at her, voices overlapping. How does it feel to win? Emily paused, drew a long breath, and answered simply, I don't feel like I won. I just feel free. And for her, that freedom, though paid for in pain, was the greatest reward of all. 5 years after the trial, Emily Carter stepped into another morning, and into another life. She was no longer the young woman cornered in a dark cabin, no longer the sister trembling in front of her brother's shaking gun. Now, Emily was someone else entirely. Grown, steady, strong in ways she once couldn't even imagine. She lived in a small suburban house, its porch painted white, the garden filled with lavender and wild daisies. Neighbors often saw Emily walking her little daughter to school, a coffee cup in one hand, offering a warm smile and a wave like any ordinary woman. No one would guess that this quiet woman owned enough wealth to drive her entire family into ruin. Emily had used her inheritance exactly as her grandfather would have wanted. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't waste it. Part went into long-term investments. Another part funded a scholarship for orphans in town, children like she once was, growing up with the sting of being forgotten. She also opened a community health clinic, a place where those without money could still receive decent care. To Emily, that was the sweetest revenge, turning wealth into life, not into chains of greed. Sometimes, at sunset, she sat on her porch, watching her daughter play in the yard. She remembered the hate in Mark's eyes during the trial, Jessica's tears as she left the stand, her father's heavy, bowed head. Those memories never disappeared. But Emily had learned not to let them imprison her. They had become scars, painful once, but proof that she had survived. She often told her daughter, money never defines your worth. It's what you do with it and how you live that decides who you are. It was the same lesson her grandfather left her, not just through the fortune, but through his quiet wisdom. One afternoon, speaking to students at the community center, Emily said, don't think justice only lives inside a courtroom. Justice begins the moment you dare to say no when you're being forced, when you stand for what's right even if everyone else stays silent. And sometimes, revenge isn't about making someone else hurt. The sweetest revenge is living well and living free. The room went silent. Then applause filled the hall. Not because her story was dramatic, but because they understood something simple. Real strength doesn't come from defeating someone else. It comes from never letting anyone strip away who you are. That night, Emily wrote in her journal, if anyone asks, I wouldn't have chosen this path. But since I had to walk it, I choose to rewrite it. With kindness, with freedom, and with a life no one can ever force me to sign away. And that was the true ending. Not the gunshot, not the trial, but the peace Emily built with her own hands.